John 1. Um, I guess you've hopefully heard the intro. So the setup is that John's intention is to bring believers back to the beginning. What did they receive in the beginning? Remember, he said, if that which you heard from the beginning abides in you, then you also will abide in the Father and in the Son. And he says that if we abide in him, he says, now little children, abide in him, so that when he appears, you may have confidence at his coming and not shrink back in shame. The source of our confidence before the Lord when he comes is that which we heard from the beginning, what we received in the beginning, which is a message on the one hand, but on the other hand, John wants you to see that the message is, there's something more intrinsic. The message is the outward form, but the inward reality is Christ himself. When you received the word, you were regenerated with the life of Christ. When you believed, you received something, which is Christ himself. You received Christ's life through the impartation contained in the word. So for John, the word is something so much higher than just spoken sounds that deliver a propositional message. Yes, with your mind, that's how you embrace it. But the rest of your being is also engaged in embracing that word. And it does more than just give you thoughts. It gives you light and it gives you life. And this was critical because at this time in church history, this is the last thing written in the Bible. You think Revelation is the end of the Bible, but actually John, 1st and 2nd and 3rd John are the last words in the scripture. The most up-to-date truth. John at the end of his life, in emphasis, delivering what he thought would be the most essential to leave with the saints. After everything they'd gone through. This is after Paul wrote 1st and 2nd Timothy, when Timothy got so discouraged that he just wanted to quit because of all of the doctrinal strife and infighting and the false doctrine and people rising up and decimating the churches and turning them away from Christ in you, the hope of glory, back to all kinds of ethical teachings, fables, myths, visions, an overemphasis on so-called spiritual things that are actually carnal, outward things. People had been turned practically away from Christ, who is the head, and no longer knew how to grasp him with their being. They just knew how to think about him as one figure amidst a whole menu of religious items they were handling. So it's like it was the form of godliness without the power. The power of godliness is a person being manifested. That's what Paul says in 2 Timothy or 1 Timothy 3:16. Great is the mystery of godliness. He was manifested in the flesh. And for Paul, godliness is Christ manifested in me. Not me trying to be something, not me trying to do something, not me trying to become something, but me as a vessel in which a treasure dwells. And Christ, God strengthening him in me in my inner man through his spirit, and Christ making his home in my heart, and Christ magnified in my body, and for me to live as Christ. So again, John is Pauline. There's a lot of people who say these days that John isn't even for the church. It's really too bad, because the spirituality of Paul is really distilled in a really concentrated form in John. And it's like John is the cream. John is the milk and the honey. John is the fatness in God's house, the best wine. the oil. I mean, it is Christ in so many ways presented to you to be your satisfaction. And the way we interact with Christ is through the Word. Yes, through the Spirit, but the Spirit and the Word are one. So when John emphasizes spiritual things, he emphasizes the oneness between the Father and the Son and the Spirit, right? The Father is in the Son, and the Son is in the Father, and the Spirit is the flow of this wonderful three-in-one person as the river of the water of life that reaches us. And then we're brought into that oneness so that we are in Him and He is in us. And when it comes to the Word, John's focus is that this triune God is really expressed in the Word, and the Word was not just sounds and a message and propositional truths, although it is God's testimony concerning His Son, and it is the Spirit that bears witness, right? And the Spirit uh, infuses the Word with life, and when the Word comes to us, it should be life. What people had left was their first love, which is really just the life. And what John promised the overcomers in Ephesus was, we shall eat of the tree of life in the midst of the paradise of God. Bring us back to the tree of life. Bring us back to Christ as life. And his point is that the Word and Christ cannot be separated. They are the same. When you come to the Word, you should be coming to Jesus. And when you come to Jesus, it should be through the Word. Like he said in John, you search the Scriptures thinking that in them you have eternal life, but you won't come to me that you may have life. And a lot of people, like in the emergent church, say, see, we don't, and even the charismatics, we don't need to just be Bible people. We need to come to the Lord, as if there's a way to come to Him experientially apart from the Word. And there's really not. And in fact, that leads you into deceptive forms of spirituality and manifestations of things that aren't necessarily the Holy Spirit. Yes, the Spirit confirms the Word as well with signs, right? But the signs are presented to confirm the Word. They're not something apart from the Word. The Word is the focus for John. He wants to bring everybody back to the Word, but he's wanting them to say, look, this Word you received is something more than just doctrine you're fighting over. It is life. It is Spirit, and it is life. It is Christ Himself. So with that in mind, let's just look at how he starts this. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by Him, a person. Without Him was not made anything made that was made. In Him was life, and the light was the light of men, and the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it or comprehends it not. The Word was, and we're all familiar with this, was with God and was God. This is God Himself expressed. God's expression of Himself has always been through the Son. The word logos means the expression. The Word is God expressed, which is really what the Son is. Jesus Christ is the expression of the Father. He said, when you see me, you've seen the Father, right? And in Hebrews 1, let's look at that real quick. God, who at sundry times and in diverse manners spoke in time past to the fathers by the prophets, has in these last days spoken to us by His Son, or in His Son, whom He has appointed heir of all things, by whom He made the worlds, who being the brightness of His glory and the express image of His person. This is Christ is the express image of God's person. He is the brightness of God's glory. He is the shining out of God. When God shines, it's in His Son. And that's why Revelation says that the city has no need of the light of day, because God himself is the light and the Lamb is the lamp, meaning Christ is the light bearer to shine forth with God. And that light is manifested in the redemptive work of Christ. Really, where it was manifested is him as the Lamb. It's the Lamb that's the lamp. That points to his work on the cross, which is why he came in the flesh. The Word became flesh, which we'll get to. But the point is that God shines in his Son, and the Son is the expression of God. And it's always been like that. Later in this chapter, he'll say, no one has seen God at any time. The only begotten Son, who's in the bosom of the Father, he has expressed him. The only way to know God is through Jesus Christ, because Christ is God's expression. Christ is God speaking. But when God speaks, it's more than just sounds. It's a person. So his word is a person. And this is the person that created everything. So in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, right? How did he do that? Through the Son. The Son is the means. And then God said, let there be light. What was that? He spoke light into existence, and that light was the Son. That was his entrance into the creation which he had made. He created the heavens and the earth, and then he entered it as light. The same was in the beginning with God, right? So he is God, and he's also with God. And that's a concept through John. Again, the Trinity is presented in the other Gospels with an emphasis on the three. But in John, the emphasis is on the oneness. It's the Father in the Son and the Son in the Father. And Jesus said, I am not alone, but my Father with me. He comes from, and actually in the Greek, from what I understand, and I'm not a Greek person, but I have a Bible that has a bunch of notes on this. And it's when he comes from the Father, the word is from with. It's actually like a compound kind of word that means from and with. So when the Father sends the Son, he comes with the Son. And we kind of have the idea that Jesus came down and the Father stayed in heaven. But actually, the Father came with the Son and in the Son. The Son is the embodiment of the Father. He's the shining out of the Father. He's the expression of the Father. And when he comes with the Father. And that's why 1 John says, if you receive the Son, you receive the Father also. And he who denies the Son denies the Father also. And Jesus said, if you love me, if you love God, you'd love me, because I came from God. They're linked. They're one person coming forth. Then it says, all things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made. And everything was made, you were made, I was made. I want to say that sin was not said to be made. Sin entered. It's just, God made the universe with some freedoms that allowed eventually for the entrance of sin. But that doesn't mean God made sin. Just kind of a clarifying point. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. So again, the point, when we handle the word, we see it as light. When we handle this Jesus, it's the knowledge of God shining on us, right? But in that light, life is imparted. And that is the point. God's intention is that we would have his life. Not just that we would be enlightened, but that we would be enlivened. So shining and quickening go together. When we're illuminated, we are infused with life. And that's John's point, is that your coming to the Word needs to be with a understanding that you're coming to touch the Son, who is the expression of God. And when you receive him, you receive God himself, the triune God, the Father in the Son in the Father, as the Spirit. Jesus later says, my word is spirit and life. The flesh profits nothing. And we tend to approach the words with our mind first, which is true. That's the way we're designed. But we need to touch the word with our whole being. We need to touch the word with our spirit and recognize that it is spirit and life, and that our purpose in coming to the word should be to receive life and light. Something more intrinsic than just coming away with facts. I have so many emails from people asking me this and that and this and that, and it's clear that they handle the word almost like an encyclopedia, where they go into the word and they're looking for this answer about the Philistines, and that answer is about Goliath, and this answer about the Nephilim, and that answer about Babel, and this answer about Jezebel, and this answer, and all that information is there. We need to have an understanding. But none of that helps us to walk in the Spirit. None of that settles your fears. None of that quiets your soul. None of that brings you into pasture. None of that brings you into rest. None of that nourishes you. What nourishes you is Christ himself as life, shining on you as light and infusing you with himself. And like even in that part where God said he used to speak in many ways to the fathers through the prophets, now in these last days he's spoken to us in his Son. And it says he's the radiance of his glory and the impress of his substance, is how the Darby says it, but it's exact representation of his nature in the King James. But the word is charakte in Greek, which means engraving tool. And it's the kind of thing that a king would use to impress his seal into an envelope. And the seal had the image of the king, his signature, that would mark that envelope as a message from him. And the seal would like impress onto wax, right? An image. So the way God speaks in his Son is like an engraving tool. He speaks in Son, he impresses his Son into us. See, when we receive light, more is going on. God is he's pressing Christ into us as life. And our Christian life is really all these little snapshots of glimpses of glory, glimpses of Christ. Like in 2 Corinthians, it says that God who shined light, or called light out of darkness, has shined in our heart to illuminate the knowledge of his glory in the face of Jesus Christ. And he also says, we all with unveiled face, beholding as in a glass the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into that same image from glory to glory. We get glimpses of the glory of God shining in the face of Jesus Christ throughout our life. And God brings us through various trials, which are only for the purpose of weakening the flesh, causing us to have to turn desperately to him. And then he shows us something about Christ. And that knowledge changes us because it infuses something of him into us. And we go from glory to glory. That's how transformation works. Transformation is not just me becoming different and changing my behavior or something like that. No, transformation is Christ being impressed into me as light and life. Through my handling in the Word, in situations that bring me desperately to him. And like this coronavirus, this should be a time where we are desperately coming to the Lord to contact him directly. So that's the point. I understand that this is all very spiritual and sounds very theoretical, but I'm trying to impress that the Word is something more than what we tend to make it. And spiritual knowledge of Christ is what we really need. That's our food and drink. And I would just say, when you come to the Word, how are you coming to it? Are you coming to it as a book of information? Are you coming to it as a book of instructions on how to live? Are you coming to it primarily as just a foretelling of events that you see going on in the world? A map, you know? Or do you actually come to it and are you able to breathe Christ through it and drink and eat of him and be nourished by him? Have you come to that? That is the most intrinsic way to come to the word. And it doesn't mean that you have to read. I mean, I've said, yeah, we should read whole chapters of the Bible at once, whole books of the Bible at once, so that we can understand the thought. There is a need for a sober mind, a trained mind, to study the word, to understand what God is saying. But then, even more important, there is the need to be able to get the nutrients out of the word to where we come to it and we open our heart to the Lord himself and we do whatever it takes to actually see something of Christ. And we can't make that happen. Don't get me wrong. This is not something that you necessarily can make happen, but our thirst and hunger changes as our vision changes. So if we don't have a vision for receiving Christ from the Word, as the Word, in the Word, then we won't hunger and thirst for it. And if we don't hunger and thirst for it, we won't pray for it. And if we don't pray for it, we definitely won't enter into it. We need to have a vision that God's intention is more than knowledge. It is Christ being imparted to us as life as he shines on us. And we need to have that kind of vision when we come to the Word. We need to expect that that's what will happen. And it won't always happen. It's not something you can control. It's not something that you get to say, okay, I'm going to be a spiritual person now, and when I come to the Word, it's going to... No, all you can do is hunger and thirst. That's all we bring to the table is hunger and thirst. He says the rich he sends empty away, but the poor he fills with good things. We need to have the right desire, which takes a renewed mind, a different way of thinking. When I come to the Word, I don't want just information, Lord. I want you. Please. I open myself up to you as best as I know how, and I want to eat and drink you. And I thank you that you are the Word. I thank you that you are the Spirit. I thank you that you are God himself. I thank you that when I received you, I received the triune God. I received the Father. I received the Son. I want to fellowship with you. Lord, bring me into this fellowship. And then as you read, that'll slow you down. Because now it's not a matter of the information per se, but the milk and meat in the Word. There really is something that you can taste in the Word. I don't know if you've ever tasted the goodness in the Word. There's a taste to it. There's a taste in anointed writing that you can taste it with your spirit. When you read apocryphal writing, or when you read a newspaper, or when you read an encyclopedia, that taste is not present. And it grieves me when people don't know that taste and they handle the Word as if it is a newspaper, and they handle the newspaper as if it's the same level of the Word, right? We have to be, we come as needy receivers. We don't come with anything of ourselves, anything of our ability. This is beyond our ability. We can't make the light shine, and we can't make the life come forth. All we can do is be hungry and thirsty. And then as we come to the Word, open ourselves up to Him and say, Lord, I want to touch you. I want to see something of you. And we learn that as we get those glimpses of Christ that fill us with appreciation of Him, we know by faith that we're also receiving the life. We're growing a little. We're being transformed. It brings us into the Spirit. It brings us into a different realm where our heart is satisfied with Him. Okay, I'm going to leave it at that. So that's the first. I told you this isn't a study. This is just a meditation.